He refused to kill civilians, but fell in love with an alien. In a city drowning in floods and poison, where survival is nothing but a gamble, one ex-soldier thought he would spend the rest of his days in silence. But everything changed on a stormy night, when he saved a starving alien child digging through trash. Her desperate words, "My mother will be the perfect wife for you," ignited a chain of events no one could have predicted. What began as survival soon turned into a fight against soldiers, machines, and fate itself, and a forbidden love that could change everything. This is the story that will keep you breathless until the very end. Rain hit the city like a punishment that never ended, slamming against corrugated roofs, spilling down cracked concrete walls, and rushing through alleys that once held markets, but now carried only the stink of rot. The neon signs still flickered in stubborn defiance, though half the letters were dead, painting broken words on black water. Somewhere in that mess of noise and shadow, a man walked with his hood drawn low, boots finding the solid strips between drain grates as if he had memorized the city's bones. His name was Darien Meyer, 34 years old, a man who once carried a rifle at the edge of the frontier, who once stood waiting for orders that he prayed would never come. The order had come, and he had refused. That refusal had cost him his uniform, his rank, his so-called honor. But he never regretted it. He would not fire on civilians. He would not trade his soul for another line in the history of pointless wars. Now his life was smaller, quieter, dirtier. He mapped contamination. He patched roofs. He carried filters from one flooded block to another, measuring how many weeks of breathable air the ridge machines still had in them. His hands smelled of rust and damp insulation. His apartment was a box on the third floor of a leaning tower that should have been condemned years ago. Yet he stayed, because someone had to. Someone had to keep the water drinkable. Someone had to be there when pipes cracked and children coughed blood. And maybe, just maybe, if he kept walking, if he kept fixing, he could drown the echoes of that one day he had walked away from the army. That night, with the storm pressing down and his pack heavy on his shoulders, he cut through a side alley where dumpsters overflowed with plastic and mold. The smell was sharp enough to burn the back of his throat. He meant only to pass through, head down until he heard it. A sound too light for rats, too hesitant for dogs. A rustle, a scrape, a small gasp. He turned, scanning the shadows. That was when he saw her. She was small, maybe 10 or 11, though alien ages were always a guess. Her frame was all angles, ribs pressing through a thin coat of fur, white as winter snow but streaked with grime. Her ears were triangular, twitching like a fox's, and her eyes glowed faintly violet in the half-light. She was digging through the refuse, her hands trembling as she pulled a half-rotten food pack from the sludge. She bit into it before even checking if it was edible. Darien stopped. He should have kept walking. This was none of his business. The city was full of strays, human and otherwise. But the sight caught him like a hook under the skin. Something about the way she froze when she noticed him, like prey waiting for the strike, made him lower his hood, show his face. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, voice steady, calm, the way he used to talk to villagers caught between crossfire. "That'll make you sick. Come on. There's food in my place." Her ears twitched again. She didn't answer. She just stared, clutching the half-rotten pack as if it were treasure. He sighed, glanced at the sky where lightning stitched the clouds. "You'll drown out here," he muttered. Then softer, "You can eat. Just eat. No tricks." Minutes later, she sat on a stool in his one-room apartment, dripping rainwater onto the floorboards. He slid a bowl of reheated stew across the table, watched her inhale it as though every second mattered. She ate too fast, choking once, but refused to stop. He gave her water. She drank until her hands shook less. When she finally looked up, her voice was small but strangely clear. "I heard you want a wife," she said. The words were sharp, rehearsed, carrying a weight too large for her small body. "My mother is perfect for you." Darien blinked, taken off guard. He had expected thanks, or silence. Not this. "What?" "My mother," the girl repeated. Her name, she told him, was Zai. Her mother's name was Narl. They had nowhere left to go. And somewhere in the ruins of gossip and desperation, Zai had heard the simplest equation for survival. A man alone, a woman desperate, and the possibility of a deal. Darien sat back, the storm outside pounding the windows. He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Kid," he said slowly, "that's not how this works." But the words hung there, heavy, because he knew she wasn't just offering, she was begging. Later that night, he met Narl. She entered his apartment like a cornered animal, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. She was tall, lean, her white hair tangled but her movements deliberate. She looked at him as if expecting chains behind his smile. He raised both hands, palms open. "One night," he said. "That's all. Dry clothes, a roof, nothing else, no touching, no control. Safety. That's the rule." For a long moment she didn't move. Then with a stiffness that betrayed exhaustion, she nodded. Zai curled against her side, finally allowing herself to sleep. Darien watched from the other side of the room, sitting on the edge of his cot. He thought about how strange it was, how in this city of broken things, the most fragile might be the only ones still fighting to survive. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he wasn't entirely alone. The morning came gray and sour, with the stink of floodwater rising through the streets. Darien cooked what little he had left, split 3 ways instead of one. He watched Narl eat slowly, with controlled dignity, while Zai devoured her portion like a starved wolf. He didn't complain. He simply handed over more of his own. 2 days passed. In that time, small rules grew between them like threads of order binding chaos. Leave your boots by the door. Don't step on the cot with shoes. If you go out, leave a note. Don't slam the door. The frame barely holds. Narl proved her worth without a word. She stitched torn fabric into makeshift blankets. She cooked with skill even when ingredients were scarce. She never begged, never hinted at barter. When he offered food, she accepted with gratitude but never expectation. She said only once quietly, "I do not sell myself. Not for shelter, not for food. I work. That is enough." Darien respected that more than he could say. In the evenings, Zai sat at the table while Darien scratched letters onto scraps of cardboard. She learned to read her own name, to count beans with small, eager fingers. Each time she succeeded, her grin lit the room brighter than any neon sign outside. And slowly, something shifted. The silence that had always been Darien's only companion began to fill with voices, soft laughter, the sound of a child's questions. The apartment felt less like a bunker and more like a home. One night, as thunder rolled and the 3 of them huddled under patched blankets, Narl spoke, her voice low but steady. "I want to be seen as a woman," she said. "Not a bargain, not a body to be traded. A woman who chooses." She looked at him directly, and for once her gaze wasn't defensive. "I choose you." The weight of those words hung heavy in the dim room. Zai stirred in her sleep between them, unaware that something fundamental had shifted. By the week's end, Darien took a scrap of paper, wrote 3 rules in thick strokes, and laid it on the table. Together they signed it, a family contract of sorts. Number 1, we eat together. Number 2, we tell the truth. Number 3, we wait for each other. It wasn't law, not in any city ledger, but it was theirs. And in the silence after the ink dried, Darien realized that the empty space he had lived in for so long had finally become a home. Not through ceremony, not through legality, but through choice, respect, and the fragile thread of trust. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, 3 lives had begun to weave into one. The storm outside had eased into a steady rhythm, rain whispering against the thin glass like a lullaby meant to mask the truth that this city never slept, never stopped hungering. Inside the small apartment, shadows stretched long across the floor, the dim light of a single bulb swaying slightly as the wind pressed at the building. Darien sat at the edge of his cot, half watching the paper contract pinned to the wall, the 3 rules they had written, the fragile promise that bound them tighter than anything the city could issue. But his eyes kept drifting, not to the rules, but to Narl. She moved with deliberate care, folding Zai's ragged clothes by the table. Her hands were steady, her shoulders strong, even though he knew she carried the weight of years of fear. The fur that framed her collarbones caught the light like frost on stone, shimmering faintly each time she shifted. He told himself not to stare, not to read more into the small silences between them. And yet in the quiet, the air seemed thicker, like the walls themselves understood something was shifting. Zai had fallen asleep early, curled into the mound of patched blankets. Her small breasts filled the silence, a steady rhythm that made every other sound louder. The scrape of Narl's chair on the floor, the faint creak of her knees as she sat. Darien tried to focus on the storm, on the way water streamed down the glass. But when he glanced at her again, she was already looking at him. Her eyes were not the hard, suspicious ones from the first night. They were softer now, as if the steel edges had dulled, as if the act of eating together and sharing the air of this room had eroded some invisible wall. She did not speak at first, but her gaze was question enough. Darien cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the closeness. "You're safe here," he said quietly, as if reminding himself as much as her. Narl tilted her head. "Safe," she repeated, tasting the word. "Do you believe that? In this city?" He gave a dry laugh. "No, but we can pretend for a night." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something that lingered dangerously close. She shifted on the chair, fur cloak slipping just enough to reveal the line of her shoulder, pale against the shadow. He looked away, heat pricking the back of his neck. It wasn't shame. It was the sudden awareness that the room felt smaller, the distance between them shorter than the arm's length it actually was. "You refused the war," she said suddenly, her voice low, probing. "Why?" He turned to her. The question caught him off guard, though he should have expected it. "Because they ordered me to fire on civilians. I didn't." Her eyes held his, searching. "You chose not to kill." "I chose not to become something I couldn't live with." The silence stretched. The rain filled it, but beneath that sound, something else lingered. Unspoken. Electric. Narl leaned back slightly, her gaze still locked to his. "You keep rules," she murmured, gesturing to the contract on the wall. "But rules break when people do." Darien inhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Then maybe we hold them tighter." Her cloak slipped again, deliberately this time, and he saw the pale curve of her collarbone, the rise and fall of her chest as she drew a breath. There was no innocence in the gesture, no accident. It was a test, a provocation wrapped in silence. "Do you see me as a woman?" she asked finally, voice hushed but sharp as a blade. The words cut through him more than he expected. He swallowed, throat suddenly dry. "Yes," he said simply. "I do." For the first time, her expression broke, not into softness, but into something raw, almost hungry. She rose slowly from the chair, every movement deliberate, like a predator circling prey it had finally decided to claim. The bulb overhead flickered once, throwing the room into half-darkness before stabilizing. She stopped only a few steps from him, the air between them hot with unspoken choices. Darien did not move. He forced himself to breathe evenly, to remember his promise. No touching, no control. Safety. But her presence filled the space so completely that the rules blurred. She leaned down, close enough that her hair brushed his cheek, her scent sharp and wild, like rain-soaked fur and smoke. "Then look at me," she whispered. He did, and it nearly undid him. Her violet eyes glowed faintly in the dark, catching his reflection in them, as if she were pulling him into her world. His heart thudded harder, his hands curled into fists against his knees to keep from reaching. The urge was there, primal, undeniable, but he held. Her lips were close enough that he could feel the heat of her breath. "You keep your word," she murmured. "But what if I break it?" Darien's voice was low, almost hoarse. "Then it's your choice." The storm outside roared louder, as if answering the unspoken tension in the room. Narl lingered there, a breath away, testing the line, tasting the edge of temptation. Then slowly she drew back, her cloak falling back into place. Her eyes still held his, but there was something else now, a recognition, a dangerous trust. She turned, moving back to the chair, though the air remained heavy with what almost happened. Darien exhaled only when she sat, his chest tight. He knew the danger was not in her claws or her strength. It was in the way she could unmake him without lifting a hand. Hours later, as Zai stirred in her sleep, Darien found himself lying awake, the memory of her nearness replaying in his mind like a burn he couldn't shake. Every detail, the brush of her hair, the heat of her breath, the way her voice curled around the question, haunted him. He closed his eyes, but the darkness only made her image sharper. In the quiet, he admitted something he had not said aloud in years. He wanted. Not just company, not just survival. He wanted her, and that want was more dangerous than any war he had walked away from. The following day, he buried himself in work, fixing a leaking pipe down the hall, patching a roof with tar scraps. But even then, the memory clung. When he returned, Zai was at the table with a stub of charcoal, writing clumsy letters on scraps of paper, her grin wide as she showed him her progress. Narl stood at the stove, stirring thin stew, the scent filling the room. She did not look at him at first, but when she did, the faintest shadow of last night flickered between them. Dinner was quiet, but charged. Every glance across the table felt like a spark leaping between wires. Zai chattered about her letters, oblivious to the undercurrent. Darien forced himself to listen, to smile, but his thoughts kept circling back to Narl's whispered words, her nearness, the heat that still lingered on his skin. When Zai finally drifted to sleep again, the silence returned, heavy as the storm. Narl sat opposite him, her cloak loose, her hair falling over one shoulder. She studied him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "You didn't touch me," she said softly, almost accusing. Darien met her gaze. "That was the rule." Her lips curved, slow, dangerous. "And if I change the rule?" He felt the question settle deep in his chest, like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. The contract on the wall seemed almost fragile now, the ink too thin to hold against what pressed between them. The room grew hotter, though the rain outside had chilled the air. Her eyes never left his, and in that silence he knew the battle wasn't outside in the streets, but here, in this room, between two people who had already lost too much and had only trust left to gamble. When she rose, stepping closer, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Darien stayed still, heart pounding, knowing that this time it would not be his decision. And in the dim light, as the storm raged, the distance between survival and desire blurred into something he could no longer ignore. The storm had not left, only shifted. By the third night, the city's veins overflowed, black water rising in the alleys, swallowing the glow of half-dead neon until even light seemed fragile. Darien watched from the window, hand pressed against the cold glass, eyes following the current, dragging debris down the street. The city was drowning slowly, and all he could think of was the heat of Narl's eyes the night before, her voice threading through him like a command he didn't know how to disobey. Behind him, the room was too quiet. Zai slept curled on the cot, lost in a world where monsters did not scrape against doors or whisper at windows. But Narl was awake, sitting at the table with her back straight, cloak draped loosely across her shoulders. She wasn't sewing tonight. She wasn't cooking. She was watching him, as though she could read every thought from the set of his shoulders. "You carry something heavier than this storm," she said at last. He turned, startled by her voice cutting the silence. "Everyone here does." She shook her head. "Not like you." Her gaze pierced him, demanding truth. He wanted to deny it, to retreat behind the comfort of silence. But he couldn't. "I left because they told me to fire on children. I left because the uniform didn't mean protection anymore. It meant slaughter. And if I stayed, I'd be a monster too." The words came sharper than he intended. Zai stirred in her sleep, mumbling something but did not wake. Narl's expression didn't soften, but her voice dropped lower, steadier. "Then why do you stay here in this ruin?" Darien exhaled, leaning against the glass. "Because someone has to. Because if I can fix one roof, one pipe, then maybe someone doesn't drown. Maybe a child breathes tomorrow." He met her gaze. "Because walking away once was enough." For a moment, neither moved. Then slowly, Narl stood. She crossed the small space with the quiet precision of a hunter, but there was no malice in her step, only intent. She stopped close enough that Darien could feel the warmth radiating from her, even through the chill of storm-damp air. "You are strange," she said softly. "Humans are always chasing power. You chased mercy." His laugh was bitter. "Mercy doesn't keep you alive." Her hand lifted, hesitant but firm, fingers brushing the fabric of his sleeve. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shock through him, sharper than any battlefield memory. She looked at him as though waiting for him to pull away. He didn't. Then the knock came. Sharp, violent, against the door. Darien spun, every nerve lit. Narl's hand snapped back, her posture shifting instantly into defense. Zai stirred, sat up groggily, fear flashing in her eyes at the sound. The knock came again, harder, rattling the loose hinges. "Stay back," Darien whispered, moving silently toward the door. His hand went to the drawer where he kept a length of pipe sharpened to a crude spear. The city had rules. Never open your door at night. Never answer knocks you didn't expect. He had broken one rule already, bringing Narl and Zai inside. He couldn't afford to break another. The knock turned into a pounding, then a voice, raspy, desperate. "Open! Water's rising! Please!" Darien froze. He glanced back. Narl was already pulling Zai close, her body coiled like a shield. Her eyes met his, filled with suspicion, with warning. He hesitated only a second before pulling the door open a crack. Water spilled in immediately, ankle deep. A man stood there, soaked, shaking, eyes wild. His clothes were marked with a faded crest. One Darien recognized instantly. Military, Frontier Corps. The same uniform he had burned years ago. "Help me!" the man gasped, stumbling forward. Darien shoved the door wider, dragging him inside before the flood could push past. The man collapsed to the floor, coughing water, clutching his side. Blood mixed with the flood water around him, dark and spreading. Narl hissed softly, pulling Zai back. Her eyes never left the stranger, her every muscle tense. Darien crouched beside the man, checking the wound. A knife slash, deep but not fatal if treated. His chest tightened. The crest on the man's sleeve marked him not just as Corps, but as one of the unit that had stood beside Darien the day he walked away. "Why are you here?" Darien demanded, voice low, sharp. The man's eyes flickered open. Recognition spread across his face. "Meyer, you still alive?" He coughed blood. "They'll come. They'll follow." "Who?" Darien pressed. But before the man could answer, distant shouts cut through the storm, boots sloshing through water, the sound of weapons striking metal. The voices were close, moving through the flooded street. Narl's ears twitched, sharp. She whispered in her own tongue. Words meant for Zai, who clung tighter to her. Darien's grip tightened on the pipe spear. He had walked away from war, but war had found him again. The pounding started, this time not desperate, but brutal. The doorframe shook. "Open up! We know you took him!" Darien's blood went cold. They weren't just soldiers. They were hunters. And now they knew his name. The man on the floor groaned. "Don't! Give me up! They'll kill us all!" Darien's mind raced. If he handed the man over, maybe they'd leave. Maybe. But more likely they'd see Narl, see Zai, and decide one human wasn't enough. This city had no mercy left in it. Narl's voice cut through the panic, low and firm. "You choose, human. Them. Or us." Her words struck him like a blade. He looked at Zai, trembling against her mother, then at the man bleeding on his floor. He thought of the order he had refused, of the civilians he had chosen not to sacrifice. And he knew. When the next strike hit the door, Darien braced it with his shoulder. "Get to the back," he hissed at Narl. "If they come through, we fight." Her eyes flashed, not with fear, but with something like respect. She pulled Zai behind the table, crouching low, her claws flexing against the floorboards. Darien gripped the pipe spear tighter. The pounding grew louder, splintering wood. The storm roared in unison, water rushing higher outside. He had wanted only survival, only quiet. But in that moment, with danger clawing at his door, he realized something had changed. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. The door cracked. Wood splintered. A boot forced through, followed by the glint of steel. Darien lunged, driving the spear forward with the precision of a soldier who had sworn never to be one again. The strike hit true. A shout rang out. The body fell back into the water outside. Silence, then chaos. Voices screamed. Gunfire exploded, rattling windows. The storm swallowed the sound, but the vibration shook the floor. Darien pulled the door shut again, heart racing, blood on his hands. He looked back at Narl. She was crouched like a storm herself, ready to strike. Their eyes met. No words passed. None were needed. The city was watching. The night was listening. And inside that room, 3 people realized they were already bound tighter than rules or ink could hold. Because survival was no longer enough. This was war again. The air in the room did not relax after the fighting stopped. It tightened. The door hung on a crooked angle, one hinge bent, the lock broken into a crooked grin. The flood outside hissed as it licked the threshold, and the bulb overhead buzzed as if scolding them for using up luck like biscuits. Darien set his shoulder against the door, jammed the broken chair under the handle, and forced himself to breathe. The spear was sticky in his hand. He did not look down at the blood on his knuckles, because if he looked, he might remember the exact point of impact, and every oath he meant never to break again. He looked at Narl instead. She had Zai tucked behind her like a shield, one hand spread across the girl's shoulder, the other rigid and ready. Her eyes were bright, sharp, not from fear, but from the calculation of a mind that had not had the luxury of safety in years. "They will not stop," she said. It was not a question. "No," Darien answered. The soldier on the floor groaned. He was younger than Darien remembered in the first shock of recognition, his cheeks hollowed by weeks of bad food, the crest on his sleeve washed almost pale by the flood. Recognition clicked fully into place and brought a name with it. "Oren," Darien murmured. The man's eyes fluttered. "You walked," Oren rasped. "I should have done it with you. They called it a purge. Cleanup, like mud in a pipe. But it was people. They are still doing it. They say aliens carry rot, so they cut them out." He winced, hand pressed to his side. Narl lowered slightly, enough to look him over without abandoning her guard. She did not flinch at the blood. She did press her lips tight when she saw the crest. "He will live if we do not make him run a race tonight," she said. "But we cannot keep this door through another visit." Darien knew that already. The shouting had moved down the street, but it had not dissolved. It had changed pitch. The kind of sound men make when they step backward only to step sideways with a better plan. He turned, spotted the cupboard that held a sorry tangle of rags and a roll of old roof tape. "Narl," he said, tossing the tape. "You and Zai pack what we can carry in 2 minutes. Food first, dry cloth next. Anything that says we were here last should be burned or soaked. Oren, you get one choice. You come quiet and prove you left that crest behind, or you stay and take your chances with men who think civilians are softness they can scrape away." Oren tried to push himself up, failed, wheezed out a humorless laugh that turned into a cough. "And miss a walk in this weather," he said, then lifted his arm with the awkward dignity of a drowning man. "Help me up, Meyer." Darien slid the spear under one forearm, Narl took the other, and together they levered Oren to his feet. Zai hovered, small and fierce, clutching the cardboard with their 3 rules like it was a charm that could ward off bullets. "Do we take it?" she asked, voice pitched somewhere between practical and pleading. Darien looked at the paper, ink scrawled thick and messy, corners already curling in the damp. "Yes," he said. "Fold it, put it inside your shirt, and do not lose it. If we are foolish enough to carry anything besides our lives, it should be that." Narl's mouth curved, not a smile, more like an acknowledgement. "We will add a new line," she said. "Number 4, we knock first." "Number 4, Darien agreed, then realized the joke only when Zai snorted a small laugh and clapped a hand over her own mouth, as if laughter might draw enemies the way blood drew razorfish in the canals. He wanted to tell her it was all right to laugh. He wanted to promise many things. He settled for shouldering his pack and grabbing the coil of rope he kept for roof work. The hallway outside was a narrow throat of damp and echo. The stairwell was half a waterfall now, water spilling down steps, eaten thin by rust. The building groaned like a weary animal. Darien pointed up, not down. "Rooftop," he said. "I patched a hatch last month. It will hold. There is a path along the gutters to the laundry roof. If the gutters do not break." "If they break?" Narl asked. "We get wet," Darien said, then added, because she was right to ask, "We get very wet." Oren grunted. "I have always wanted to drown in a laundry." "Do not make me leave you behind for the poetry," Darien muttered, then shifted his stance and tested the first step. It held. They climbed. 3 floors meant a dozen calculations. Narl moved like a roomer, quiet and fast. Zai tucked between her and the wall whenever the railings gave up, pretending they were safe. Oren was slower, each step a negotiation with pain, and Darien took some of his weight without announcing it, because pride in a flooded stairwell was a performance for an audience that did not exist. On the 3rd floor landing, Darien paused, listening. Voices outside, not directly below. The patrol had split. That meant at least one pair would think like he did, and if they thought like he did, they would cover the roof. He changed their route without changing his expression, because panic was a contagious cough. "Change of plan," he said softly, through the janitor closet. "There is a maintenance ladder that runs behind the elevator shaft. It is ugly, but it is steel. Steel beats wood in a fight with gravity." The closet door stuck from years of paint and neglect. Narl looked at it the way one might look at an uncooperative animal. She set Zai aside, rolled her shoulders, and gave the handle a careful twist and push that said she had opened far more stubborn doors with far less gentle hands. It popped with a sigh. The smell of mildew and something that might once have been soap rolled out. The ladder was indeed ugly. It was also intact. "I go first," Narl said. "I will catch Zai if she slips." Zai did not roll her eyes because she had learned quickly that eye-rolling in a flood could turn into a swim. She climbed, quick and careful, small hands sure on corroded rungs. Narl went above her, not to catch so much as to become the rung Zai would never miss. Darien got Oren moving after them. The soldier grunted in a manner that was half complaint and half gratitude, which is to say, like any man whose body had not yet decided if it wanted to live. Darien brought up the rear, pulling the closet door shut behind him. The shaft amplified every drip and whisper. He could hear his own breath, counted it when his heart threatened to outpace his feet. The hatch at the top protested like a cat in a bath. Narl braced, pressed, then laughed under her breath as it gave way. "Your patch is good," she said, crawling onto the roof. "Your hatch is stubborn." "My hatch is humble," Darien said. "It is shy with strangers." He immediately regretted the sentence because Narl glanced back with a look that said she was deciding whether to smirk at him or kiss him, and neither option was sensible with a wounded man wedged in a ladder and armed men somewhere below. The roof let them breathe for a second. Wind came cold and wet, the kind of wind that strips heat like a thief. The city spread in a rough quilt of black water and wobbling lights. It might have been beautiful if it had not been trying to kill them. The gutter run was a narrow ledge, barely wider than a handspan. It carried a river of roof water along its shallow trough. Darien tested it with his weight, pushed down, felt the bracket bite the brick. "It will hold if we move one at a time," he said. "Do not look down. Do not look anywhere except where your next step goes. And if someone falls, they will be very embarrassed later at the lecture I give them." Zai nodded very seriously and then ruined it by whispering, "I do not like lectures." Narl gave Darien a look that told him he had just become a teacher with a student who heckled lovingly. He was not sure if that was the most dangerous assignment of his life or the one that might save it. They moved. Narl went first, Zai behind her, each step a small piece of courage. Oren followed, jaw clenched. Darien came last, rope looped around his shoulder, eyes flicking to the street where a patrol boat nosed around a corner, its search lamp skimming walls and water with lazy malice. He counted breaths, not steps, because numbers soothed the nervous system that remembered artillery by the shape of silence. On the third roofline, a loose bracket protested with a squeal. Oren's foot slid. He cursed, a vivid and creative combination that announced his frontier education. Darien did not think. He shifted forward, caught Oren by the back of his jacket, and felt the gutter flex with enough sincerity to make prayer seem like a practical choice. "Move!" he hissed, and Oren did, legs finding purchase again. The search lamp dipped up, swept close, then passed on as if bored. Darien exhaled so sharply he nearly laughed. "If we live, I am buying that lamp a drink for ignoring us," he said. "I do not think lamps drink," Zai whispered. "This one does," he said. "It drinks the tears of men who almost fall off gutters." That earned him a suppressed giggle that Narl tried and failed to smother with a glare. Humor in a storm was not dessert. It was bread. They reached the laundry roof soaked with rain and pride. The door into the laundry was chained from the inside. Darien fished a bent nail from his pocket, one of the dozen sins his job taught him to commit for good reasons. He worked the padlock, whispering apologies to the door like it was a neighbor he was waking in the night. The chain came loose with a complaining rattle. Inside, the big drums of the old machines sat like round bellies in a gathering of metal elders. The air smelled like rust and the ghost of soap. A line of forgotten clothes hung in one corner, a robe moving as if it had not realized the person who draped it would never come back. Zai went to the closest machine, put her ear to the drum, and declared solemnly, "It is empty. We can hide in them if we have to. I will be a sock. You will be a girl who rests for 3 minutes," Narl said, voice gentler than her words. Strong girls who are clever must also be clever about when to breathe. Zai climbed into a nest of towels and looked instantly 5 years younger in the safety of their stale softness. Oren sagged onto a bench. Darien found the first aid box he had bolted under a counter months ago for anyone desperate enough to break in and civilized enough to do it here. He opened it, and Narl joined him, hands already steadying the bandage roll, focusing the light of a small hand lamp with a smooth movement that betrayed a long history of field repairs on bodies and clothes alike. "Alcohol?" she asked. "Yes," he said, then added, "Not the kind that wars want." "Pity," Oren muttered. "I could use a drink that erases last week." Darien cleaned the wound while Narl held the edges. Oren, to his credit, cursed only in his mother tongue after the first sting, and even then kept it creative. Zai watched from her towel throne with big eyes and did not interrupt until the worst was over, at which point she declared, "Number 5, we do not bleed on the good floor." Darien blinked. "We have a good floor?" Zai pointed at the small patch Narl had scrubbed obsessively earlier that morning, the one square yard that dared to look like hope. "That is the good floor," she said. Narl's mouth twitched. "Number 5, she said. "We respect the good floor." "Add it," Darien told Zai, and Zai solemnly took out the folded paper, added a crooked line, and copied the words with the gravity of a clerk working in the last clean office left in the city. He caught Narl's gaze, felt that same pull that had nearly undone him in the apartment, and looked away because his hands were full of gauze, and because Oren was not quite asleep, and because there was a rule somewhere about not falling in love directly over a bleeding soldier. The search lamp outside brushed the laundry windows. They froze. The beam lingered, curious, then slid on. Darien released the breath he had trapped in his chest like a forgotten tool and glanced at the rusted door on the far side of the room. "There is a crawl above the boiler," he said softly. "Small but dry. Better insulated than any of our past refugees. If they do come in, we can hold there. I have a stash in the vent." "Of what?" Oren asked hopefully. "Crackers and a radio," Darien said. "The radio barely works. The crackers barely deserve the name. But they will remind us we are not ghosts." Oren closed his eyes. "Then I will live to be disappointed by your pantry." Narl shot Darien a look that asked what else he had not mentioned. He spread his hands. "I hide things. When I can. In case someone needs it. Sometimes it is me." Her expression softened just enough to tell him the answer had landed where it should. He showed Narl the crawl entrance. It was mean and narrow but dry, with a view of the boiler room through a gap missing 2 bricks. Inside, a small cache sat in a plastic tub. A crank radio, a thin blanket, a sealed tin marked with a date, and a smile drawn by some past version of Darien, who had wanted to prank his future self into a grin. Zai pounced on the radio like it might tell bedtime stories. Darien cranked it just enough for static to hum, then turned it down until the sound was more suggestion than noise. He did not want it to call friends or enemies. Oren faded, leaning back against the wall with the expression of a man whose body had decided to do the sensible thing, even if he had not. Narl and Darien sat near the crawl opening, close enough that their knees nearly touched. The steam from the boiler warmed the air, making a fog that curled around their hair and softened hard edges. For a few minutes, the world tried to pretend it was not on fire. "You are good at this," Narl said quietly. He shrugged. "Hiding in laundries? Or thinking 2 steps ahead? Keeping people breathing." He let that sit on the table between them, then tried to lighten it, because the air was too tender to carry the full weight. "I have a certificate," he said, "issued by me, signed by a very important person." "Who?" "Me again." She made a sound that was not exactly laughter, but was close enough to make his chest ache. She shifted her cloak off her shoulders and draped it around Zai, who had stopped pretending to be awake. "We have to talk about what you did," she said. "The door. The spear." "I know," he said. "You saved us," she said. "I was going to say you killed someone," he replied. "That also happened," Narl said, practical as weather. "But if you are going to keep me and my child in your home, you should know I am not sorry. I do not celebrate it. I do not collect it like men collect trophies. But I am not sorry. He looked at her and saw not the teeth or the ears or the fur, but the person who had made a line in herself and stood on it, even when the flood tried to scrape it away. I am not sorry either, he said. I am sorry we had to, but I am not sorry we are still here. They sat in companionable silence that managed to be awkward and warm at once, like sharing a bed with a cat that chooses your face as a pillow. After a moment, she tilted her head. You still want what you wanted, she said. He did not pretend to misunderstand. Yes. Good, she said, and then ruined his attempt at composure by adding, because your jokes are very bad, and only a person who wants you would let you make more of them. He choked on a laugh and then winced because laughter the nightmen hunted you was a reckless luxury. She touched his arm and left her hand there. It was not a question. It was not a push. It was a resting place. The radio hissed. A voice tried to climb out of static, failed, then found a rung and rose. East Sector, purge order, non-compliant residents to be cleared at dawn. The words snapped the room taut again. Narl's hand closed around his arm with real pressure. Oren stirred, opened one eye, swore wearily. Zai moved under the cloak, the word dawn turning into a shape even children knew to fear. Darien turned the radio off and looked at the three people who had become, somehow, his stubborn reason to keep patching holes in a world determined to become a sieve. We cannot stay here when the light comes, he said. They will push through the low blocks first, herd people toward the river and call it rescue. There is a dry corridor under the viaduct, the one that carries the old filter lines. It connects to a maintenance bay near the hill, where the air still tastes like it tries. You have a map in your head, Narl said. I live there, he said. Not in the corridor, in the broken places. Maps keep me from falling off edges I cannot see. Oren grunted. What is the plan? Darien looked at him and found a face he had not seen in years, except in mirrors when he woke sweating. A man who had once believed orders would make him clean. The plan is to steal back something the city thinks it owns, Darien said. Our mourning. And after mourning, Narl asked. He studied her eyes. They held all the hunger and all the caution he felt. After mourning, he said slowly, we see if we can make normal out of strange. If we can make a house out of water and rules and a laundry that pretends to be a church. We see if number 4 keeps us from uninvited knocks and number 5 keeps the good floor clean. We write number 6 when we must. Zai pushed her face out from under the cloak, hair messy, eyes bright with stubborn faith. Number 6, she said sleepily. We always come back. Darien's throat tightened. He nodded. Number 6, he said. Narl's fingers tightened once on his arm and then let go, slower than necessity demanded. The room felt different after that. The awkwardness was not a wall now, but a cushion around something that might not break if handled with care. Outside, the wind pushed at the laundry door and went away again, bored by people who refused to panic on command. They ate crackers that did not deserve the name and made faces that made Zai giggle until Narl shushed her with a smile. Darien found an old jacket in a forgotten bin. He held it up. It was large enough to fit all 3 of them if they tried, which Zai immediately suggested with the gravity of a child proposing a tactical plan. They did not do it, but they did stand close long enough to make the room warmer without the boiler. Dawn came like a rumor of a lighter color along the edge of a drowned street. The city is always honest at dawn. It tells you what it will take if you dare to stay. Darien shouldered his pack again, checked the rope, checked Oren's bandage, checked the small sky map in his head where gutters and beams and handholds made a constellated path. Narl adjusted the cloak around Zai's shoulders, then looked at Darien with an expression that made his breath stutter for a heartbeat. It was not a promise. Promises were rich. It was a decision made at the edge of a flood. Go, she said. We will follow. He opened the door and tasted the air. It carried metal and river and something bright like new sparks. He stepped into it and almost laughed at the absurdity of what they were about to try. He had told a search lamp he would buy it a drink. He had negotiated with a gutter. He had written a contract on cardboard. Now he would ask a viaduct to be an ally. Ridiculous, all of it, and somehow exactly what life had left them. They moved out as the first siren sounded far away, a smug bark against the morning. Darien did not look back because he did not need to. The soft rush behind him told him Narl and Zai were there. The steady drag then step told him Oren was too. The laundry door swung shut gently, as if to say, "You were safe here for a few hours. You may be safe again." The city lifted its stubborn, ugly, beautiful face to the day. Drama tightened around them like a belt, but left room for breath. Awkwardness walked beside them, refusing to believe it should stay behind closed doors. Humor carried the other end of the rope, and ahead, hidden under a viaduct, a path waited that might lead to a place where people still sat at the same table and added rules to a sheet of paper, not to hold each other in place, but to hold each other together. The viaduct was a cathedral of steel and shadow, its arches echoing every step they made. Water dripped steadily from the beams, striking the concrete in slow rhythms that sounded too much like a clock counting down. The group had made it through the flood lines, slipping past patrols and lamps, carrying Oren's weight in careful silence. At last they had reached the dry corridor Darien remembered from years of maintenance work, a forgotten artery of the city where the old filters still clung to life. Inside, the air was cooler, cleaner, the taste of iron fading into something almost crisp. It was the kind of place where, for a moment, one could believe survival was more than a daily negotiation. Oren slumped against the wall, half asleep but alive, his wound bound and his body finally surrendering to rest. Zai curled at his side, exhaustion pulling her down fast, her hands still clutching the folded paper of their rules as though it was more important than food. Darien set his pack down, his shoulders aching. When he finally straightened, he saw Narl watching him. She stood in the dim glow of a broken light strip, her hair damp, her cloak draped loose, her violet eyes unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was not hostile. It was heavier than that. It was charged, like the air just before lightning. "You keep us alive," she said finally, her voice quiet, almost reverent. He shook his head. "You keep yourselves alive. I only patch things." Her gaze softened, but her stance did not. She crossed the small space between them with the slow precision of someone making a decision that could not be undone. When she stopped, her hand lifted, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. The touch was simple, almost casual, but to Darien it felt like the breaking of a dam. "You want me?" she said, not as a question, but as a fact spoken aloud at last. Darien's throat tightened. "Yes. And I choose you," she replied, just as steady. "Not for safety, not for food, but because I am tired of being only survival. I want to feel like a woman again." Her words were not a plea. They were an offering, fierce and vulnerable all at once. His chest ached with the weight of them. He reached up, slow enough that she could step back if she wished, and let his hand rest against her jaw. Her skin was cool, soft beneath the edge of her fur. She did not pull away. The kiss was inevitable. When their lips met, it was not frantic, but deep and deliberate, the kind of kiss that carried years of silence, breaking at once. Her hand gripped his shoulder, steadying herself, or perhaps steadying him, and for the first time in years, Darien let himself want without apology. They sank to the floor, careful not to wake Zai, careful not to rattle Oren. Their world narrowed to the heat of breath, the press of mouths, the slide of fingers against fabric. The storm outside, the city, the danger, all of it blurred into background noise. What remained was the raw, urgent need to remind themselves they were alive, not just surviving. Narl's cloak slid away, revealing the pale curve of her collarbone, the subtle lines of muscle beneath her fur. Darien's hands traced her with reverence, not possession, each touch a question that she answered with a sigh, with the way her body leaned closer. She unfastened his jacket with hands that trembled not from hesitation, but from anticipation, as though she had rehearsed this moment in her mind as often as he had. The intimacy between them was not rushed. It was slow, deliberate, a series of choices layered one upon the other. Their mouths met again and again, hungrier each time, until words were useless. His fingers tangled in her hair, hers traced the scars across his chest. She paused at one, her touch lingering over the jagged line. "A wound," she whispered. "A reminder," he murmured. "Of what?" "That I'm still here." Her lips pressed to the scar in answer, and the gesture undid him more than any battlefield ever had. They moved together with urgency, tempered by tenderness. Every shift of her hips, Every arch of his back was a conversation in motion. Her breath caught against his ear, his name leaving her lips in a voice he had never heard before. Softer, needier, unarmored. He whispered hers in return, not as a name but as a vow. Their bodies pressed close, skin to skin, warmth building until the cold of the viaduct was forgotten. The rhythm of their movements echoed faintly off the steel walls, quiet but undeniable. It was not only the act of desire, it was a claiming of life, a rebellion against the endless hunger of the city. When they finally stilled, it was not collapse but surrender. She rested against his chest, her breath warm and fast, his heart pounding against her ear. His arms held her, not as a shield, but as an anchor. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was Zai's soft breathing and the drip of water far down the corridor. Then Narl lifted her head, her hair falling across his shoulder. "You will regret this," she said softly, though her lips curved into the ghost of a smile. Darien brushed the hair from her face, kissed the corner of her mouth. "If regret feels like this, I'll take it." She laughed, low and quiet, a sound he realized he had never heard from her before. It was sharp and beautiful, the laugh of a woman, not a survivor. She pressed her forehead to his. "Then we write a new rule." "Number 7, he said, already smiling. Her violet eyes gleamed. "We choose love, even when the city does not." He nodded, the words sinking into him like truth carved into stone. "Number 7, he repeated. They lay together, tangled in warmth, the storm outside pounding futilely against the arches. For the first time since he had left the war, Darien felt more than survival. He felt home. And though dawn would bring danger, though soldiers and flood and hunger would return, in that moment they had carved something untouchable out of ruin. Not safety, not certainty, but love, fierce and deliberate, written into their bones like another rule on the paper Zai kept folded tight. The quiet after was a fragile thing, like glass balanced on the edge of a table. Narl's breath still warmed his chest, her body draped against him, her hair tangled with his shirt. Zai stirred once in her sleep, but didn't wake, still clutching the folded paper of their rules close to her chest. Oren snored softly from his corner, the wound pulling his body down into unconsciousness. For the first time in longer than Darien could measure, he let himself drift. The ache in his muscles, the steady heartbeat in his ears, the presence of someone pressed against him. These were not burdens but comforts. He allowed himself to believe, for a handful of breaths, that survival had finally given them room to be more. It was Zai's voice that shattered the illusion. "Mother!" Darien's eyes opened. The girl was awake, sitting up, her violet gaze wide and strangely solemn. She clutched the rules with both hands, her small frame stiff. "What is it?" Narl murmured, still half drowsy, rising on one elbow. Zai's voice shook. "They found us." Darien pushed up immediately, senses sharpening, every muscle ready to spring. He listened for boots, shouts, the scrape of weapons. But the corridor outside was silent. The dripping water hadn't changed its rhythm. No shadows moved in the glow of the light strip. "What do you mean?" Darien asked, his voice low. Zai looked between them, her small hands trembling around the paper. "I heard them, in the static, on the radio. They said your name, Darien Meyer. They said your location." His blood ran cold. Slowly he turned to the radio, still sitting on the tub in the crawl, its dial turned low. He hadn't touched it since the last broadcast, but its indicator light glowed faintly. The faintest hiss of static pulsed, like a breath waiting to be drawn. Oren groaned awake, eyes half opening. "What's wrong?" Darien didn't answer him. His gaze was locked on the radio, on the realization curdling in his stomach. He stepped forward, flicked the knob off. The light stayed on. "It's not a receiver," he said slowly, his voice tight. "It's a beacon." Narl's eyes widened, fury flashing there. "A trap." "Not mine," Darien snapped. His hand shook as he yanked the casing open. Inside, wires coiled around a pulsing core, far too advanced for the old crank radios scattered through the city. This was a tracker, military issue, masked in familiarity. It had been waiting for someone to use it, and he had carried it here like a fool. Oren cursed, sitting up straighter despite the pain. "Damn it! They'll be here by dawn. If they said your name, They're not just purging, they're hunting you. Darien felt Narl's hand on his arm, steadying him even as her claws flexed. Why would they want you? She asked. He swallowed, mind racing. Because I walked away. Because I know too much. And because I'm proof someone can disobey them and live. Oren's laugh was bitter. Not for long, Darien forced himself to think. We can't go back to the streets. Patrols will net them tight. They'll flood the viaduct. They'll flush us out. We cannot outrun the tide with a child and a wounded man, Narl said, her voice hard with truth. Zai hugged the paper tighter, her eyes brimming. We have rules. Number 6. We always come back. We can't break it. Darien crouched in front of her, took her small hands gently in his. We're not breaking it. We're writing the next rule. Number 8. We fight for each other, no matter the cost. She nodded fiercely, tears sliding down her cheeks. Oren coughed, spitting red. You'll need more than rules. You'll need a distraction. And I'm the one already bleeding. Darien's jaw clenched. You won't buy us time by dying. Oren met his eyes with something sharp, something painfully familiar. You taught me once that orders aren't worth souls. Now let me teach you that sacrifice can still buy a chance. Narl hissed, shaking her head. No, we don't trade bodies for minutes. We find another way. The argument was cut short by a distant sound, the unmistakable grind of armored boots on steel, echoing faintly through the viaduct. Close. Too close. Darien's heart hammered. He grabbed the pipe spear, shoved the broken radio into his pack. His mind raced through blueprints of the city, the old tunnels, the collapsed sectors, the forgotten vents. Somewhere in that labyrinth was a crack big enough to slip through. Then he remembered. A chamber beneath the filter plant, sealed years ago when the pumps failed, accessible only through the maintenance shafts that crisscrossed the viaduct like veins. Dangerous, half-collapsed, full of gas pockets, but no patrol would risk it. We go down, he said. Narl frowned. Down where? Beneath the plant. The shafts still connect. They'll expect us to run outward, not under. Oren laughed weakly. You always did love a suicide route. Darien ignored him. He looked at Narl, at Zai, at the fierce line of trust tying them together now. It's the only way. If we stay, we die. If we run up top, we're caught. But below, he hesitated. Below we might vanish. Boots echoed again, louder this time. Orders barked. The patrol was spreading. Narl gripped his wrist hard. Then we vanish. Together. Darien nodded once. He lifted Zai into his arms, her small weight both fragile and fierce. She pressed her face into his chest, whispering the rules like a charm against fear. Narl helped Oren stand, slinging his arm over her shoulders despite his protests. They moved quickly, every step a gamble. Darien found the grate he remembered, half hidden behind a corroded pipe. He ripped it free, the metal screaming against stone. Below, darkness yawned, deep and absolute. The smell of rust and stagnant water rose up to meet them. Narl's eyes glowed faintly, catching what little light remained. She gave him a sharp nod. Darien went first, lowering Zai into the shaft, her small hands clutching his neck. Narl followed with Oren, lowering him with care. The boots above grew louder, closer, the sound of hunters closing in. Darien dropped the grate back in place as the first beams of searchlights cut across the corridor. They descended into the dark. The shaft was narrow, slick with moss and age. Water dripped steadily, cold against their skin. Their breaths echoed too loud, hearts pounding too fast. Darien led with one hand on the wall, the other gripping the spear. Every step downward felt like stepping out of the world and into something older, something that had been waiting for them all along. And then the twist came, not from soldiers above, but from below. A faint hum, mechanical, steady, alive. Darien froze. He knew that sound. It wasn't water, it wasn't wind, it was power. The shaft opened suddenly into a chamber, where blue light pulsed faintly from consoles half buried in rubble. Machines that should have been dead for decades blinked with slow, deliberate rhythm. Pipes ran along the walls, humming with energy that should not exist. Narl gasped softly. What is this? Darien's mouth went dry. This is human tech, pre-war, from before even I was born. Oren's eyes widened, his exhaustion forgotten. No, they told us it was all destroyed. Darien stepped closer, his hand brushing dust from a console. Words flickered across the screen. Human words, sharp and clear. A login request. A system waiting for a password no one alive should remember. Zai peered around his shoulder, her voice small but steady. It's still alive. Darien stared at the screen, at the impossible glow of it. This isn't just a shaft, he whispered. It's not just a plant. It's a hidden facility. They didn't erase everything. They buried it. Narl's voice was low, awed and afraid at once. And now we've found it. The boots above thundered closer. The soldiers were moments from breaking into the corridor they had abandoned. But down here, in the forgotten dark, Darien realized they hadn't just escaped. They had uncovered a secret the city had been built to forget, and it had been waiting for him. The chamber breathed around them like some forgotten beast, the blue glow pulsing from consoles that should have been dead for centuries. Dust hung in the air, disturbed only by their movements, catching the light like tiny ghosts. Darien stood frozen, one hand braced against the console, his mind stuttering between terror and disbelief. Still alive, Zai whispered again, as though repeating it would make it less impossible. Narl kept her body between her daughter and the machine, her claws flexing unconsciously. It feels wrong, she muttered, like something that should not have been left breathing. Machines don't breathe, Oren grunted from his half-seated sprawl against the wall. But I'd argue this one's doing its best impression. He coughed, wiped blood from his mouth, and gave Darien a pointed look. And you look like a man who's just met an old lover in a graveyard. Darien ignored the jab, though the heat in his face betrayed the truth of it. This isn't just power, he said quietly. This is command infrastructure, pre-war, buried tech no one was supposed to know about. Zai, who had no reverence for forbidden history, leaned closer to the screen. Can I press something? No, Darien and Narl said at the same time. The girl rolled her eyes dramatically and flopped onto the dusty floor, muttering, Then what's the point of finding a glowing box if you don't get to press the shiny parts? Darien almost laughed despite himself. Almost, because the console chose that exact moment to hum louder, its screen flickering from static text to a slow scroll of words. English, human script. Welcome back, Darien Meyer. The air snapped taut. Narl stiffened, her hand tightening on Zai's shoulder. Oren swore under his breath. Darien felt every muscle in his body seize. He hadn't touched anything. He hadn't logged in, hadn't spoken. But the system knew his name. That's impossible, he whispered. Apparently not, Oren muttered. You've got fans in very weird places. Narl's eyes narrowed. Explain. Darien swallowed hard. I can't. I've never seen this. Unless... He hesitated, mind flashing back to his time in uniform, to whispered rumors about ghost systems and fail-safes left in the ruins of the old world. Programs built to identify soldiers, to test their loyalty, to bind them even after death. Unless they tagged me when I enlisted. Biometrics, DNA signatures. If this place was tied into Central Command, it might still carry those files. Then it thinks you still belong to it, Narl said flatly. The console beeped again, impatient, as though offended at being ignored. A new line scrolled across the screen. Authorization required. Stand by for identity test. The walls began to vibrate faintly. Somewhere deep in the chamber, machinery stirred. Panels lit up one by one, a ripple of blue that made the air warmer, heavier. Darien's pulse spiked. This isn't just storage. It's active. And if it's active, it's broadcasting. That means your hunters don't even need a radio anymore, Oren said grimly. You've just lit up a beacon the size of a cathedral. Panic stirred in Zai's face. They'll find us. Yes, Narl said. Her voice was steady, controlled, but her tail lashed once, betraying her fear. Unless we kill it. She raised her hand, claws unsheathing. Wait, Darien barked, stepping between her and the console. We don't know what it's tied to. Kill this system, and we could trigger fail-safes, floods, explosions, poison leaks. This entire viaduct might collapse. Oren chuckled bitterly. So our choices are drown, choke, or get shot. Splendid buffet, Meyer. Darien rubbed his forehead, tension clawing at his skull. He was trained to survive on the edge of nowhere, to patch pipes, to keep filters breathing. He was not trained to negotiate with ghosts of machines that remembered his name. The console beeped again, more insistent. Then a new line appeared. Biological match detected. Initiating. Darien's blood iced. He staggered back, shaking his head. No, no, I didn't. The chamber lights flared. A hiss of gas vented from the floor, sharp and metallic. Zai coughed. Narl pulled her cloak tight around her daughter. Oren swore and pressed a sleeve to his mouth. And then the voice came. Not from the console. From the chamber itself, low and mechanical, echoing through hidden speakers. A woman's voice, calm and cold. Darien Meyer, you are listed as deserter. Unauthorized survival. Status, compromised. Directive, reclamation. The word echoed in the steel like a hammer blow. Narl bristled, stepping closer to Darien, her body coiled. What does that mean? Darien's mouth was dry. It means, it thinks I belong to it, and if I don't, I'm not allowed to exist. Wonderful, Oren groaned. You've woken up your old boss, and she's mad you skipped work. The chamber hissed again. Panels in the wall shifted, unlocking with slow, dreadful clicks. From the shadows, mechanical forms emerged. Drones, skeletal frames of steel and old plating, their eyes glowing with the same cold blue as the consoles. They moved awkwardly, but with purpose, rising from their nests like insects disturbed. Zai whimpered, clutching Narl's leg. Mother! Narl's claws gleamed in the glow. Stay behind me. Darien raised the spear, but his voice cracked with disbelief. These things should be dead. Nothing should have survived this long. Oren forced himself to his feet, leaning heavily on the wall. And yet here they are, ready to add us to the floor decor. We really do attract the worst house guests. The first drone clicked, its head tilting toward Darien. Darien Meyer, report for reclamation. Narl bared her teeth. He reports to no one. With a screech of metal, the drone lunged. Darien moved instinctively, spear thrust flashing. The point punched through brittle plating, sparks spitting as the drone collapsed in a shower of parts. Another followed, then two more, their limbs whirring with desperate hunger. The chamber erupted into chaos. Narl slashed, claws tearing steel as though it were cloth, her growl sharp and furious. Darien fought with precision, every strike guided by the memory of battles he had sworn to leave behind. Oren, half crippled, but unwilling to be useless, hurled broken pipes and stones, cursing every time he missed. Zai darted in the shadows, her voice rising in panicked but stubborn chants of their rules. Number 1, eat together. Number 2, tell the truth. Number 6, always come back. The words carried through the chaos like a rope. One drone nearly reached her. Darien's heart seized. He threw the spear, the impact shattering the machine inches from her small frame. She screamed, then went silent, her eyes wide, her arms wrapped tight around the paper of their rules. The drones fell one by one, brittle metal no match for desperation, sharpened by love. But when the last collapsed, the console pulsed brighter, angrier, as though the system itself was aware. The voice returned, calm but louder. Resistance detected, escalation authorized. Darien spat blood, gripping the spear again. It's calling more, Narl hissed, wiping steel dust from her claws. Then we end this. No, Darien said. His chest heaved. If we destroy it, it collapses everything. If we let it live, it calls more hunters. There's only one way left. Oren wiped sweat from his face. Which is? Darien looked at the console, at the glowing words still waiting for him. His gut twisted. I give it what it wants. Narl's eyes flared. You can't. He met her gaze, his voice hoarse but steady. If I don't, it will keep hunting. It knows my name, my blood. It won't stop until I'm back in its hands or dead. The silence was sharp. Zai shook her head furiously, tears running down her cheeks. No! Rule 6! We always come back! You can't break it. Darien knelt, pulled her close, his voice breaking. Then we'll have to write Rule 7 louder than the machines. He kissed her hair, then pressed the folded paper back into her hands. Keep it safe. Don't let me disappear. Narl's claws gripped his arm, digging deep. If you walk into that light, Darien Meyer, you will not walk back out. He looked at her, at the woman who had chosen him not for safety, but for love. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. How after years of patching filters and roofs, his life came down to negotiating with a ghost in a machine. "I've walked away once before," he said softly. "Maybe this time, I walk in and change what waits inside." The console pulsed, waiting. The chamber hummed, impatient. And Darien Meyer stepped forward. Darien stood before the console, blue light spilling over him like cold fire. His body was tense, his mind clawing for control against the pull of fear. Narl's hand lingered on his arm until the very last moment, her claws biting gently into his skin as though she could hold him here by will alone. Zai's muffled sobs echoed in the chamber, her small fists clutching their paper of rules so tightly it might dissolve in her grip. Oren's breathing was ragged. Every inhale weighted with pain and defiance. The console waited. The machine voice pulsed again, calm and merciless. "Darien Meyer, report for reclamation." Darien straightened his shoulders. He had walked away from one war, but this one had found him anyway. And yet, unlike before, he was no longer walking alone. He stepped forward and placed his hand flat against the console. Heat surged beneath his palm, a searing recognition that made his pulse falter. The screen flared, and the voice shifted, becoming almost intimate. "Identity confirmed. Authorization level. Elevated. Awaiting orders." Darien blinked. "Orders!" The chamber stirred. Lights rippled outward. More machines clicking awake in the shadows. Narl growled low in her throat, ready to fight again, but Darien lifted his other hand sharply. "Wait." He leaned closer to the console. "System, I'm not yours. I left." The voice responded instantly. "Desertion noted. Punishment pending. Override available. Input required." Oren let out a sharp laugh that turned into a cough. "Looks like she wants you to choose. Whip or leash." Darien gritted his teeth. He had expected death. Not this. An old system still clinging to chains long rusted through. He forced his voice steady. "Input override." The console paused. Then, "State directive." Darien hesitated, breath caught. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but burning with something fierce. Behind him, Narl's violet gaze drilled into him. Zai clung to the paper like it was scripture, and Oren bled but did not bow. And Darien realized. For years he had survived by patching things, filters, roofs, leaking pipes. Maybe this was just another thing to patch. Not with tar or nails, but with words. His voice rang against the chamber walls. "New directive. Protect civilians, alien or human. Anyone who chooses life. Priority family units. Priority children. Override all prior orders." The console flickered, confused. "Directive conflicts with base protocol." "Then update the base," Darien snapped. "Obedience isn't survival. Protection is. Rewrite it." The hum deepened. Sparks ran along the walls as the system strained against its own bones. The drones that had stirred froze mid-motion, heads twitching as though caught between two voices. The air grew heavy with ozone, lights stuttering in rapid flashes. Narl pulled Zai close, shielding her, while Oren dragged himself upright, ready for the chamber to explode. Darien clenched his hand on the console, refusing to let go. "System," he shouted over the roar. "I am your input. You recognize my name, then recognize my command. Rule number 8. We fight for each other. Execute it." The chamber went silent. Every machine stilled. Every light froze. Then slowly, one by one, they shifted. The blue glare softened to a warm white. The drones lowered their limbs, their optics dimming. The voice returned, but different now. Quieter. Pliant. "Directive accepted. Updating." Darien's knees nearly buckled. He let out a shaky breath, stepping back from the console. His palm burned from the heat, but it was done. The system's lights dimmed further, retreating into standby. Only one console remained alive, its glow soft, almost gentle. Across its screen scrolled new words, not commands but acknowledgments. Civilian protection, active. Family units priority. Children priority. Director, Darien Meyer. Darien blinked, throat tight. He hadn't expected to be named, hadn't wanted it. But the system had written him into its bones anyway. Behind him, Narl exhaled, low and sharp. She stepped forward, her claws retracting as her hand touched his shoulder. You changed it. He gave a weary half-smile. For once, I didn't walk away. Zai rushed to him, clutching the paper with their rules. Her small voice was fierce. Then write it down. Number 8, so it never forgets. Darien knelt, pulling the stub of charcoal from his pack. Together, Zai's small hand over his, they scrawled the words on the paper. Number 8. We fight for each other. Narl's fingers brushed the edge of the paper as though sealing it. Oren let out a wheezing laugh. Well, Meyer, congratulations. You've promoted yourself from deserter to, what is it? Savior? Dictator of dusty machines? Darien smirked tiredly. Caretaker, that's all? The moment lingered, warm despite the steel around them. For the first time since the storm had begun, the chamber felt less like a trap and more like shelter. But the city above was still drowning, still burning, still full of hunters who believed purging was salvation. The fight wasn't over. Darien stood, rolling his shoulders, exhaustion weighing him down but resolve sharpening his spine. This place is hidden. They won't find it soon. But when they do, we'll be ready. Because now we have more than rules. We have a system on our side. Narl studied him with quiet intensity. And if it betrays you again? He met her eyes steady. Then we write another rule. She held his gaze for a long moment, then leaned close, pressing her forehead to his. Good, she whispered, because I am not letting you walk into machines without me again. Zai tugged at their sleeves, her voice small but stubborn. Number 9, she declared. Darien raised an eyebrow. Already? She nodded. Number 9. We don't leave anyone behind. Not ever. Darien glanced at Narl, who nodded firmly. Then he looked at Oren, battered but alive, leaning on the wall with a crooked grin, and he felt something like laughter rising in his chest, breaking through the weight. Number 9, he agreed. The paper now carried 9 rules, each line uneven, scratched by different hands born in storms and blood and stubbornness. Not law, not government, but family. Outside, the first pale light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the viaduct. The city stirred with sirens, soldiers, and floods. But here, in the belly of forgotten machines, 3 survivors and 1 wounded soldier had written something the city could not erase. Darien folded the paper carefully, tucked it into Zai's pocket. He ruffled her hair gently. Keep it safe, he said. It's worth more than all the neon signs in the city. Zai grinned, fierce and bright despite her tears. It's ours. They gathered their packs. Narl adjusted her cloak, her violet eyes gleaming in the dim. Oren tested his weight, wincing but upright, muttering about how heroes never get the good mattresses. Darien shouldered his spear and led them toward the exit tunnels. The air tasted different now. Less like rot, more like possibility. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe the city was not only ruin, but soil for something new. As they walked, Zai's voice carried softly behind him, reciting the rules one by one, as though engraving them into the world. Number 1, we eat together. Number 2, we tell the truth. Number 3, we wait for each other. Number 4, we knock first. Number 5, we respect the good floor. Number 6, we always come back. Number 7, we choose love even when the city does not. Number 8, we fight for each other. Number 9, we don't leave anyone behind. The words echoed through the tunnel, a litany, a promise. Darien smiled as the dawn touched his face. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man patching ruins. He felt like the start of something new. Not a deserter, not a soldier, a father, a partner, a builder. And as the city roared above them, Darien Meyer stepped forward with Narl at his side, Zai clutching their rules, and Oren limping stubbornly behind. Together, a family forged not by blood or law, but by choice. Together, they walked into the future. In the end, what kept them alive wasn't weapons or walls, but trust, love, and the small rules they chose to live by. From ruin, they built a family, proving that even in the darkest places, humanity can still spark hope. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next gripping sci-fi HFY journey. Because every choice we make today can become tomorrow's legend.